I heard this story about a guy who had a waterbed. Anybody remember those? They were like great and terrible for your back all at the same time. It's the only kind of bed that could make you seasick and at the same time still give you a great night's sleep. It's amazing. But there was this guy, he had this king-size waterbed. You know how heavy those things are, right? And so he woke up one morning and there was a puddle on the bed, and he thinks, oh, great, I've got this leak. And so he tries to push this king-size mattress, this waterbed mattress, outside because he's going to refill this thing, and he wants to see if he can find out where the leak is. And so as he starts to fill up this bad boy even more with water, it's so heavy that it starts to roll. Like that's a bad day when your bed's rolling, right? So he's on this hill and the bed starts to roll down the hill and he's trying to stop it with everything he has, and he can't stop this big, huge king-size waterbed mattress. And so finally it ends up ramming into this little grove of bushes at the bottom of the hill and punctures holes. All through the whole thing, the bed is ruined. And so he said, have you ever had a day like that? I mean, it's just, everything is going wrong. So he decides, okay, I'm just going to move. He had a queen-size bed in another room, just a regular mattress. So he moves it into his bedroom, and he just figures he's just going to chalk it up to being one of the worst days ever, right? And so then the next morning he wakes up, and there's a puddle on that bed too. And comes to find out that the bathtub right above in the second story has been leaking. And that's the source of the puddle, not the water bed. And so he realizes this trouble. Like, he took the bed all the way outside, fills it up with all the stuff, thinks that that's the problem when something else is the problem. He wakes up with a messed up mattress, day 2, the same as he did day 1. Have you ever felt like that in your life? Like you just can't win for losing? Like, have you had weeks like that where it just seems like, man, you take one step forward and 2 steps backwards? It feels like something's out to get you, like plotting against you, your kids, your marriage, your coworkers, your car. Like, you ever had your car plot against you? I know it's an inanimate object, but it's like, oh, Bessie won't start up exactly when you need it to. It's like, come on, you can do this, right? In the middle of those moments, like when life really throws you curveballs, like it can feel like some of the worst days ever. And you know what? Some people feel that way about Christmas, right? Like lots of people get caught up in the joy of the holidays, and it's like super exciting and hanging ornaments and fun with family and kids, and yay, we get to see all the relatives and gifts and all these things, right? And that's some people's reality. Then other people, they feel about Christmas just like this guy felt about his no good, terrible, horrible, very bad day, right? Like maybe it's because of some of the wounds of the past, right? Past things with their family, and they don't really want to be around family for Christmas because their family was nothing to be around. Maybe it's Christmases that are forgotten, that it's the lost out potential of what could have been, and they grieve over that. They think about marriages that have divided and that they're not together. Now they have to split time with kids, or maybe you think about the ones that aren't going to be around the Christmas table this year that were there last year, and how you miss them, right? Maybe whatever it might be for you, it may just be the stressfulness and the busyness of the season. But if you've ever looked at Christmas and you felt this weight that oh man, this is going to be a tough day. Like if that's you in the house, if you've ever looked at your weeks leading up to Christmas and you've thought, oh man, this just feels like this is going to be a heavy weight and a hardship and a burden to be around family or to do this or do that. Listen, I want to tell you something. Look right here. You're in great company, because the first Christmas was much like that. Now don't let the unbelievable Christmas carols and the wonderful things, like I love all the old songs, but like there was no Silent Night. I can promise you that. Like if you've ever been to a labor, I can promise you know. There's no Silent Night. There's no like halos around the baby Jesus as he's in like this rough straw in a hewn out manger. I want to tell you, we're going to look at this story today, and you're going to see the real horror and the hardship and the pain of the first Christmas. And if you find yourself in that place this year, you find yourself in good company, because that's how Jesus was welcomed into the world. And we're going to see how God fulfills his promises even in the midst of those times of hardship and pain. So let's look together. Luke chapter 2, verse 1. In those days, a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be registered. This was the first registration when Quirinius was governor of Syria. The first Christmas started out with a reminder that everybody is under someone else's control. Right? Like it's this, they're these Jewish people who are under Roman rule, and now they're being forced to go somewhere and do something, right? Governments do that. Like they still do that today. I don't know if you guys knew that or not. But they forced them to register, and this wasn't just a registration. This is a tax happening. This particular Caesar has said that he went into Rome made of bricks, and when he left Rome, it was made out of marble, right? And so this was a taxation plan. And so can you imagine being Mary and Joseph and you get the news that, hey, guess what? You're in your third trimester. Who's excited for a road trip, right? Like this is her reality. She's got a few weeks left in her pregnancy, and here's the deal. There's this foreign government who has absolutely no care about you. They look at you like you're a nuisance and a flea and a deplorable, right? Like in all this stuff. And so that's a joke, people. Come on. All right. And so they look at this and they look at you and they force you to go and to register so that you can be a part of a kingdom that you have no desire to be a part of, right? Think about this. All the Jews are praying for someone to come, for the Messiah to come and rescue them from the hands of this kingdom. But now you're forced to go and to register in your hometown so that they can take money from you that you don't have to fund these unbelievable things, roadways and bridges and all these things that really benefit Rome and not you. And so this is their reality, this check that the sovereign ruler of the universe is now being commanded by a guy who thinks he's God. Like this emperor who believes he rules over it all is commanding where the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords is going to be born. And so they get notice that they have to go. And you can imagine what that must have been like, right? Like these circumstances of your life being ordered by somebody else, like this frustration of a last-minute trip when you thought, I'm going to have my at-home delivery, right? You got your birth plan all written out. I've got like my mom and my sisters, and they're all going to be there, and they're going to help me. And it wasn't that they were going to all be together, because this is Joseph's family's registration. She has to go where Joseph was from, so her family's not going to be there with her. She's going to be all alone, this young teenage girl, first time birth, and she's there, and she's going to have to go and travel 90 miles to be able to get to this place so they can pay taxes that they don't have to a government who doesn't appreciate them. And so this is how they start. Look at what it says, verse 3. And all went up to be registered, each to his own town. And Joseph also, he went up from Galilee, from the town of Nazareth to Judea, to the city of David, which is called what? Bethlehem, because he was of the house and of the lineage of David, to be registered with who? Mary, his betrothed, who was with child. And so there they are, they're going home, but going home is not always fun for everybody, and not when it's going to be this unbelievable crowd. Now, Bethlehem was this like know-nothing town. I mean, it was just a few people, this small little gathering place, right? But it had this great, unbelievable history. It's called the house of bread, and the bread of life that gives life to the world is going to be born there. This is the birthplace of King David, right? It has this unbelievable history, but it's still this small, know-nothing town. And now everybody who's a descendant of King David is going to have to come back to this place so that they can register. Now, can you imagine preparing for this trip, 9 months pregnant? Like, I can just picture this is after the time where Mary has gone and she's visited with Elizabeth, and now Elizabeth has given birth to John the Baptist, and then she's gone back home, and the angels appeared to Joseph, and then he's taken her home to be his wife. And so this is his wife, but they still didn't know one another until after Jesus was born. And so they're living in this space, husband and wife, and they're trying to get used to each other. And she's pregnant and hormonal, and she's like having to pee 18 times an hour, right? And so I can just picture this. They're like laying down, and in her mind, women, this is what you do, right? Like you run through your list. Oh, let's see, I need this, and I need this, and I need this for the journey, right? And she looks over there, and Joseph's like, right? And it's like, oh, I'm glad you can sleep. I'm glad somebody can get some sleep around. I can just picture her like throwing the pillow at him. But it's not Joseph's son. It's God's son, and he's going to have to raise him. And so Joseph is there, and he's like snoozing, and she's flipping out about all that they got to do and all that they got to take. And I can just picture him like, come on, we got to get on the road. We're never going to make it. It's 90 miles. Lots of people are coming. I promise you, if we don't leave now, there's not going to be any room for us, right? And so there they go. These circumstances are forced by somebody. And think of walking 3.5 marathons, 9 months pregnant. I mean, this is her reality. She's got to walk 90 miles, or even if they have a donkey. Have you ever ridden a donkey? That's not a smooth ride, my friends, right? Can you imagine? Like, it's like, Joseph, you're going to have to pull over again? Really? We just pulled over like 3 stops ago. I don't understand. And they're making the trip, and can you imagine what that was like for her, like in just a few days before she's supposed to give birth? Like all this hardship, all this pain, all this annoyance, all this frustration. This is what it felt like, but in reality, God's promises were being fulfilled. Like this annoyance and all of this stuff, it was really so that she could give birth to Jesus at the place that God had promised the Savior would be born. In Micah chapter 5, verse 2, it says, but you, O Bethlehem, even though you're least among the tribes of Judah, out of you will come this ruler who's over all. Look right here. What felt like pain and hardship and annoyance and frustration and a government commanding me to do stuff that I don't want to do and they don't care anything about me. Like that was all God's promises being fulfilled. What felt like pain, what felt like annoyance, what felt like frustration was actually the perfect will of God being worked out so Jesus would be born where he was prophesied to be born. Now look at what it says, verse 6. And while they were there, the time came for her to give birth. Can you imagine? And it's the first time mom. Like, you know how much you flip out, right? Like, first time mom's like trying to figure out the labor and what's going to happen. Is that really a contraction? I don't know if it's a contraction. Well, babe, you should know if it's a contraction. How would I know? I've never done this before, right? Like, she doesn't have her mom. She doesn't have her sisters. She doesn't have anybody. The only person she's got is Joseph, and it's her like new husband. He's never caught a baby before, right? Like what's going to happen here? Like I can imagine as they're strolling up into Bethlehem town, they're just a few miles away, right? And as she's running, she's like, what was that? Like I feel something. He's like, oh, I'm sure you're fine. You're just sore, from the ride, like tendons, sinews, like stretching, ready, preparing for the birth, whatever it is. I'm sure you'll be fine. We'll just get there and we'll rest, right? And then she figures out, she's got her sundial clock, and it's like, oh, that was 3 minutes apart, right? In the middle of this thing, like she's like, oh, no, this is legit. This is really happening. And I can just imagine, what would you want, ladies? Like you're on this trip, and you're 9 months pregnant, and you're away from family, and you're away from friends, and you got this new husband who's going to be the only one to help you out, and you're rolling up into this town with lots of frustration and lots of stuff, and there's going to be this huge gathering of people there. Like, what's the one thing in your mind that you would be asking for? Find me a room, right? Like, that's what you would want, right? Like, find me a place. Now, Bethlehem didn't have tons of inns. There were people's houses. People would welcome them into their houses to be able to stay kind of as an inn. If there was one major inn, it wasn't like what we know as an inn, like with sort of a hotel Airbnb, right? Like it's not like we're renting out this room and somebody else is renting out this room and we got one main common area. No, it was more like there's this house, but then attached to it is this courtyard. And it has walls on the side, but it's like open air camping. You're like renting a tent site, right? And it's a place for you to camp out. And then attached to it is a stable or a cave. Like they'll build it next to a cave so they could have a place for the animals to be. And so I can just imagine. Can you imagine Joseph, first time dad, right? He's flipping out. Like dads, how many of you flipped whenever your wife went into labor for the first time? Like you didn't know what to do. You're like, oh my gosh, when are we going to get to the hospital? And you're like flipping out. I can remember with our second child, she was coming really fast, and we had to drop off our 15-month-old because that's how you plan things, people. And so we had to drop off our 15-month-old with Katie's dad. And so he was Gary, you've got to meet us in the Harris Teeter parking lot, and we're gonna pass Molly off, and we got to go because Julia is coming, and she's coming fast, right? And so we get there, and in the middle of this deal, like, Gary wants to talk. And like, Katie's like, go, like, I'm like, here, take the child, wham, I'm like throwing the 15-month-old, and we're jetting to the hospital. Can you imagine Joseph's desire to find his wife a spot? Like, this is terrible. She doesn't have her mom around. She doesn't have her family around. There's nobody to help her with the birth. Like, I've got to find her a spot. And so she's there, like she's laboring, and he's going around. Hey, my wife is in labor. Can you give up your spot? Like, I know that you've already been here. I know that you've already paid. Like, I see you got your little tent already assembled, but my wife is like giving birth. Sure she is, right? No, she's right over there. Like, she's right there. Can you please, like, give us your spot so that she can have a place to be able to give birth? Like, her mom's not even here. Can you imagine? Like, think of the callousness of this culture. That he goes around to everyone, and not one person is willing to trade. Not one. Like, I've been some pretty jacked up places on this planet, right? I've been around some people that are pretty hateful. I've been around some people that are so self-centered, you're like, they literally believe the planet's revolved around them, right? But in the middle of this moment, I can't imagine a crowd where this guy is going, hey, my wife, it's her first time. She has no clue what's going on, and she just needs a spot. Somebody, for the love, just give her a spot. And having to go back and make that walk of shame back to Mary and say, nobody will do it. Nobody will do it. Can you imagine what she must have been thinking and what she must have been feeling? Like, do you think she had thoughts in her mind of, so this is what surrender looks like? Like, God, you said that I would bring your son into the world. Like, and I was down for that. Like, I said, I surrender, but this was not what I had in mind. Like, I'm bringing the King of Kings who's going to love all of these people to a place where he's willing to die for them, and they won't even give up a spot so that I can bring him into the world. Like, can you imagine the way that she must have been feeling? Things that were going through her mind, the hardship and the pain and the frustration of all of that as Joseph comes back. Nobody's willing to do it. Nobody will do it. And look at what happens, verse 7. And she gave birth to her firstborn son. And she wrapped him in swaddling clothes, and she laid him in a manger. Because what? Read this with me. There was what? No place for them in the inn. No room. No room. Can you imagine that? Like the creator who whispered everything into existence is now ready to be born. The one who made all space in all time, in all elements. The one who made the rocks that outlined this cave. The one who made the wood that actually set up the barriers of the campsite, like of their inn. Like the one who whispered life into existence is here coming so that he could save these people from their sinfulness. And their immediate reaction is, I've got no room for you. But you know what, really, we can't judge him too harshly, can we? I mean, in reality, this is most of our Christmases, isn't it? You know, we're too busy, like, to really focus on Jesus and his birth, right? Like, it's, well, we got stuff to do. Well, we've got bills to pay. Like, I'm saving up for a tax bill, right? Like, we've got stuff to do, and we've got places to go, and we're tired, and we're anxious, and we're cranky, and, we've got family things, and so we just don't even take time to make room for the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. I mean, that's what they were doing, really. But they didn't even know he was the king, and we do, and we still do it. But there they are. She gives birth in this stable. Like, don't let it fool you. Like, I love the Christmas carols. I do. I love all these Christmas songs. But I want you to think about it. Like, this isn't like nice little cow over here by Jesus, like at the birth, like the sheep are like, oh, man, praise the Son of God. Like, this is not This isn't like that kind of, has anybody been in a barn? Like, I guarantee you that smell is on nobody's birth plan, right? Like, that's not a sterile environment. That's not a place where you would want to welcome. And it's certainly not, this just isn't any kid. This is the King of Kings. This is the Messiah, the Son of God. And this is the welcome that he gets. Like, nobody has time for him. Nobody makes room for him. And it's just the animals as the welcoming committee in this filthy, stinky cave. Like, she takes these strips of cloth, and I always kind of thought that was like a poor thing. Like, she didn't have a shirt or something. But really, like, scholars tell us that was kind of like the new thing. Maybe she had been reading lots of mom blogs. I don't know. First-time mom, right? But they would bind their arms and their legs straight because they thought that it would help them grow better. And so they wrapped them up. You know, she's wrapped up. And even her trendiness or her poverty, we don't know exactly what she does. Even that is used by God to identify where to come for the shepherds. It's the one who's wrapped in swaddling clothes, laying in a manger. But here she is, and she looks around, and she's exhausted from labor. Like, ladies, you remember that feeling? You don't truly remember it, else you never had another one, right? I mean, but like, you, in the middle of that moment, like, you remember that feeling that you had just of sheer exhaustion. And she takes and she's looking, where can I put him? I can't put him on the straw over there. I can't put him. And there's this rock that's hewn out for the animals to be able to dump their food. The most humble place on the planet, in an animal feed trough for the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords. Listen, I love this verse about Jesus' coming. It's in Philippians 2. It says, who, though he was in the form of God, didn't count equality with God as something to be grasped, but he emptied himself, taking on the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men, and being found in human form, he humbled himself by being obedient even to the point of death, to death on a cross. And then it goes on to say, therefore, because he's done this, he's been given a name above every name, right? What's the rest of the verse? That at the name of Jesus, every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that he is Lord, right? He came in this extreme poverty in his first coming. He had this unbelievable, humiliating beginning because guess what? Look right here. He was willing to embrace an even more humiliating death for you and for me. He left the riches and the glory of heaven so that he could be born in squalor, completely ignored, completely cast aside in this humble family so that he could go to the cross for you and for me and take on even more humiliation because he loves you that much. He loves you that much. Listen, I guarantee you this wasn't the image in mind that Mary and Joseph had. Like, you ever say yes to God and then expect it to look a certain way? Has that ever happened for you? Like, you said yes to God in your marriage, and then you just had all these expectations of, this is what marriage is going to be. Woo! You know, it's like, we love each other, so it's going to be great, right? And there's times that are great, but there's times that are just really hard work, right? Where you just grate on each other's nerves more than you thought any person could ever grate on your nerves ever in the history of humanity, right? But it's like, that person is God's perfect helpmate to make you more like Jesus. And the way that he does that is to show you your selfishness. And that can only be through this mirror reflection of a spouse annoying you to death, right? To make you more like him. Like, have you ever said yes to God with kids? Oh, this is going to be great. Like, this is going to be amazing, right? Like, my little legacy right there, we're going to train them up in the fear and knowledge of Jesus, right? We're going to launch them like birds into the world, and they're going to soar. Fly high, bird, right? Like, for Jesus, right? And in the middle of that moment, like, there's moments like in the toddler years and then in the elementary years and the teenage years, and you just look, you're like, Lord, really? Like, this is what you had in mind? Like, this is the pinnacle of parenting right here. Like, this is not what I thought it would be. And in the middle of that moment, God looks back at us, right? And he says, it may not be what you thought, but my promises are being fulfilled. Like, in the middle of this moment, like Romans 8:28 is still true. For God works some things together for good. Is that what it is? No, all. Like the good, the bad, everything, even things people mean for evil against you. God works all things together for good for the called, for those who love God and are called according to his purpose. Like Mary is sitting there and she feels like she's been abandoned and forgotten and disappointed, frustrated, and she's weary and all this stuff as she thinks about nobody made room and this government sent us and all this stuff. And in the midst of that, God's promises were being fulfilled. Read really quickly this verse with me and then we'll be done. Galatians chapter 4. Galatians chapter 4. This is Paul's telling of the same Christmas story. Now, I want you to keep in mind, right? Like, this is all that's happened. This unbelievable stuff with the government commanding, and then she's got to go and make the 90-mile trip, 9 months pregnant. She gets there, and nobody gives a spot. Nobody gives up the room for her to be able to give birth, and she gives birth by herself, without her family, without her friends, completely forgotten by everybody and everything. And she's there, and she has to lay him in a manger, right? Like the King of Kings and Lord, like all the hardship, all the pain, all the frustration. And Paul describes this same story this way, zoomed out. Look what it says. In the same way, we also, when we were children, we were enslaved to the elementary principles of the world. But read this with me. When the what? Fullness of time, what? Had come. When the fullness of time had come, at the exact right moment, at the exact right time, when God had completely ordered everything right to this point, then what happens? Look at what it says. God sent forth his son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those who were under the law, so that we might receive what? Our adoption as sons. And because you're sons, God has sent the Spirit of his Son into our hearts, crying, Abba, Father, so you're no longer a slave, but a son. And if a son, an heir through God. Look right here. The fullness of God's timing to unleash spiritual freedom from bondage looked a lot like hardship and pain. Like the freedom that God was bringing for all of humanity, for anybody who would humble themselves and receive this free gift of salvation. Like the fullness of God being smack dab in the center of God's will for their lives looked a lot like pain and hardship and suffering and trials. And so if you find yourself there this Christmas, know you're in good company, because God uses those things to teach us stuff we'd never learn through times that are good. Write this down right here. Write this down. Things aren't always as they seem. Here's my one takeaway for you today. I want you to remember this. Remembering God fulfills his promises. Write this down. Remembering God is fulfilling his promises in the midst of the struggle can morph your trouble into treasured memories. Listen, in the midst of this time where she's there and nobody made room and all these things, like in just mere moments, we're going to talk about this story next week, the shepherds are going to come unbeknownst to her, these people who have had revealed, hey, the Son of God has been born. The Messiah has been born. He's there. He's in a manger. That's how you're going to find him. Like if he was in a tent site, can you imagine? Like as they're going into the inn and they're like ripping open tents, like, get out of here, right? Like in the middle of that moment as they come to work. But they knew exactly where he would be because the hardship put him there. Because everybody else said no to Jesus having a spot to be born. The shepherds were able to find it. And then it was just mere moments when they darkened the door of the stable. And they worship with everything they have. And in an instant, look right here, her hardship morphed into treasured memories. The Bible says that she treasured all these things in her heart as they went away. Listen, has that ever happened for you? Like, have you ever turned a corner in your marriage? Like, you've been in the midst of a really rough and difficult season, but you held on. And in the midst of hanging on, you remembered God keeps his promises. God's faithful. He's going to come through. I just need to keep trusting and keep believing and keep relying on him. And in the middle of that moment, like something happens and you turn a corner and you look back and God is morphing those things that were terrible and trouble. And one day you can look back on them and say, man, I even treasure those times because God taught us so much and God made us so much closer. Have you ever had that as a parent? Like you have a parenting scare when everything comes crystal clear and you realize like all the annoyances and all the hardships and all the pain and all the things that frustrate you and want to make you pull what little hair you have left out, right? Like in the middle of that moment, like something is instantly clarifying. You have this unbelievable moment where you realize, oh my goodness, God keeps his promises. And in that moment, your unbelievable trouble and hardship and pain get morphed into treasured memories. That's why you always hear people talk about the good old days that were terrible, right? Like, have you ever heard people talk, oh, I remember the good old days when I used to walk uphill both ways in the snow, 14 miles, right? Like, and it's like, that sounds terrible. But it morphs into these good old days because you remember God keeps his promise. Oh, I remember when we were getting married so young and we were poor as dirt and we had not 2 nickels to scrape together. Man, those sure were the good old days. Were they? Like, in the moment, they didn't really feel like the good old days, did they? But now you look back on them and you're like, God taught us so much. Oh, I remember when we were losing our minds when we had our first kid or our first 4 kids. And then we're there, like, and we were losing our brains. And man, we just felt like the toddler years were never going to end. When will they be able to go to the bathroom themselves, right? Like in that moment, but now you look back and you're like, they never talked back. It was the good old days. Right? Like formula costs so much less than a car. All of those moments, like your trouble morphs into being these treasured memories because God keeps his promises. And what feels like pain and what looks like hardship and what looks like frustration in the moment and what feels like abandonment, God looks at, he says, just hang on. Because I'm keeping my promise. It may not look like it in this moment, but one day you'll see how I've taken this and worked it out for your good. So you look more like me, and your trouble will morph into treasured memories. Remember that this week. Let's pray. There's some in this house, and I just want to speak to you if you're going through a really difficult season right now. You're going through a difficult season in your life, in your marriage, in your parenting. Maybe you're rounding that 9-month swing of pregnancy, and you just are ready to give birth like Mary was. Maybe things are just really tense in your home. Maybe you know that you're not looking forward to Christmas because of all the pain and burdens and hardships that go along with seeing extended family members. I just want to read this prayer over you as the music just plays softly behind it. If that's you, listen, just with every head bowed and every eye closed, if you're going through a season of hardship, like where you feel like Mary and Joseph, it feels like disappointment. It feels like being forgotten. It feels like pain and suffering and struggle. But you want to keep holding on because you want God to transform those troubles and morph them into treasured memories. If that's you, then without anybody looking around, would you just lift up your hand? If that's you, I just want to pray for you. Yeah. Okay. I just want to pray for you right now. I'm going to read this psalm over you. I want you to write this down and read it all week this week. Read it every single day. This is Psalm 30. It says, I will extol you, O Lord, for you have drawn me up. You haven't let my foes rejoice over me. O Lord, my God, I cried to you for help, and you healed me. Make that your prayer right now. O Lord, you've brought up my soul from Sheol. You restored to me my life from among those who go down to the pit. Anybody there, you feel like your life is just drowning? God, restore. Sing praises to the Lord, O you, his saints. Give thanks to his holy name. His anger is but for a moment, but his favor is for a lifetime. Weeping may tarry for the night, but joy comes in the morning. By your favor, O Lord, you made my mountain stand strong. You hid your face, and I was dismayed. To you, O Lord, I cry, and to the Lord I plead for mercy. Make this your prayer right now. Hear, O Lord, and be merciful to me. O Lord, be my helper in this moment. You've torn my mourning into dancing. You've loosed the sackcloth Anybody need to have their sackcloth removed? They're mourning over their marriage. They're mourning over their parenting. They're mourning over their finances, their prodigals, and their hardship and their pain. You've loosed my sackcloth and you've clothed me with gladness, that my glory may sing your praise, and I will not be silent. Oh Lord, my God, I give you thanks now and forevermore. Lord God, I pray that you would take these seasons that look like pain and frustration and hardship and other people demanding things of us that we have no control over, and all of the fear of disappointment and being forgotten and all of these things. God, take this season of pain and hardship and trial and grief and work out your great plan for us, God. Make us more like Jesus by rubbing away everything that doesn't look like him. And in these seasons of trials, God, I pray that you would make us people who are complete, able to stand through anything. And that one day, God, we would see how your promises are being fulfilled, even in this season that feels like hardship and pain and struggle and trial, that one day we would be able to be on the other side of them, to look back, and the things that feel so much like trouble now, we would look at as treasured memories. Only you can do that, Jesus. And we thank you that you came to make that reality. In Jesus' name. And all God's people said,